to connect and say, this is a global fight for all of us. So, and then I was in the middle of trying to organize some kind of a button that would represent this converge to converge, and convert to converge. So we had labor, peace, community, social justice, and climate together as one force.
Yeah. Well, and climate could really well include energy. You know, we're talking about energy here, energy use on all levels too.
Yeah. And you know, in the context of what's going on in Japan.
Oh well, yeah. Yeah.
So this is, like I said, this flowed out of conversations that Keith and I have been having. Al Fishman and I, Al made a great presentation for Peace Action at the workshop to be held, and I mistakenly totally missed your workshop, so I wasn't there. So this is sort of a continuation of that dialogue.
Okay, good. So you're asking us for an endorsement, if not active participation for an economic conversion event a year from this May 1st.
Yeah, to
2012,
build for that. Right.
Well, a couple things. First of all, let me point out again that the conversion works both ways. Frank correctly points out that we converted to a war economy in a very short time. But in 1946, after the end of the war, there were some car models out on the road, which means that it's possible to convert the other way. It is possible. It is not rocket science. It is, as Frank says, it's the political will. That's the important ingredient. I think that there are a number of ideological questions that are involved, and I think that I would heartily agree to it, that we endorse, this event next year. But I think much more than that, we have to map out a campaign from now until May 1st, which is primarily an educational campaign. Primarily that. What are the educational tasks? Well, first of all, I think that we have to convince people, working people, those who are working, and I never use the word defense, who are working in military production facilities, that they don't have to be beholden, they don't have to be addicted to this dependence on military production. There are alternatives. And I think that one of the ways I think we could do this, is to bring to this area the person that some others here are familiar with, having read his book, but a person like Andrew Bacevich, who would talk about the imposition of the military-industrial complex and the whole culture of militarism and military production as a way of life. It's not accidental that they, I don't know exactly how many, but probably half of the congressional districts in this country, at least half, are dependent on military production.
I think almost every one. I think very few exceptions.
Yeah.
Really, very few.
Yeah. 14th congressional district, one of the exceptions, and the 15th. But I think that the other element is to constantly try to improve the understanding within the labor movement, from within and from without. Okay, by building coalition. I think that the peace movement is not big, but we do have some resources. I think that were we to adopt this notion tonight, then I think it would be presented to the Detroit Area Peace with Justice Network to get the other 14 peace and justice organizations on board for this. Ron Aronson from the Huntington Woods Peace Group made some contact with Bacevich, and is there anybody who's not familiar with him at all? Okay, well, Andrew Bacevich was a West Point graduate, a colonel in the Army, and when he graduated from West Point, he bought the whole schmear. He bought the whole 9 yards of, you know, production for military purposes, and the use of U.S. military power to settle every dispute in the world. And whether if you want to call it an epiphany or seeing the light, but whatever it is, he really began to understand the corrosive nature of this, both in terms of our foreign policy, in terms of our use of our productive capacity, and in terms of our culture. Okay, so that.
The economy too.
So anyway, Ron Aronson approached him, and the thing was that $10,000 was the fee to come in. Well, that's not an impossible target to reach if we think creatively. If we think creatively, if we think about getting some universities, 1 or 2 universities to co-sponsor events. Sure. If we think about giving the time, raising not only the awareness of this issue, but also raising money for it, okay? But I think that in addition to somebody that would talk about the military-industrial complex the way Bacevich can, is also to get leading figures. I'm thinking back to October 2nd, okay, in Washington, D.C. Some of you were there. And one of the great presentations that day, well, there were several good ones. Harry Belafonte was one, and he might be involved. Or Marion Wright Edelman, whose credentials are great, and who connects the dots very, very, very well, okay, in terms of what military production does. And I think that there's some people who have picked up, I'm trying to think of the organization that's done it, but some initial work was done by some Michigan people about the whole question of what a given amount of money yields in terms of jobs as it goes into military production, as opposed to what it produces in education, in healthcare, and so forth. So I think that we need to map out a campaign. And it'll be primarily educational in nature, but keep the May 1st. I like the idea of doing it on May 1st. After all, May Day originated in this country, damn it. And so anyway, I think that's a great idea.
Rudy.
I had the privilege back in the late 60s or early 70s to be one of a group that had lunch with Seymour Melman.
Oh,
If you know his name.
Yeah.
He was the emperor of that particular idea of conversion. And a lot of his materials, I am certain, are still around, including the figures which relate the cost of $1 billion spent in war production and $1 million spent in other areas. So I'd suggest that might be an area of research. Secondly, inasmuch as the United States in general seems to prefer advocating for democracy for other countries, and looking at what you said about others now co-opting Arsenal of Democracy 2.0, I would throw into the pot, for whatever it's worth, based on what you have said is the purpose of this, that it become the arsenal of survival. And that
I like it.
because the arsenal of democracy does still have that flavor of war production. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Rudy. So, if I may, so what I'm hearing here is you want our endorsement to build toward a major event on May 1st, 2012 at the Michigan Train station, if it's still there.
No doubt it will be.
Geared toward economic conversion, which is of course an issue that we've talked about forever. And also I'm hearing that between now and then, we should try to develop some kind of educational campaign that builds toward that. And when you ran this idea by me, my thought was, and I didn't really realize you were building toward this big event on May 1st, 2012, but to speak to Al's point, between now and then, I guess what you're asking is whether we would be willing to, working with you, organize some kind of a town hall meeting style event sometime later this year as a stepping stone to May 1st, 2012. Okay. Now,
Yeah, just two quick postscripts. In addition to Melman, in Michigan, Marion and Jim Anderson, I
Yes.
just thought of their names.
Yes,
Marion and Jim Anderson in Lansing
yes.
also did the work on the
Yes.
question of civilian production versus military production. And I think
she
that
was at
some of
that lunch.
what they did is probably still around. And the other thing is that there was one large international union that at one point, for a time, while its president was alive, adopted the idea of conversion, and that was a very important international union, namely the International Association of Machinists, whose president was William Wimpesinger.
Yeah.
And when William Wimpesinger died, unfortunately, the whole idea of conversion died with him, which is unfortunate. But there was a union that did something like that. And I'll tell you something else. When Dave Elslow was the editor of Solidarity, he did a special issue, a real glossy, super expensive issue that dealt with the question of conversion. So Dave would be a guy to, maybe he's got some copies of it in his attic.
Yeah, Seymour Melman, I don't know how many books he wrote, but I'm sure I had one of his books long ago. So, I mean, it wouldn't be, the numbers would, of course, have to be changed, but that could be
This
useful resource.
National Priorities Center project, I think they do a lot of analysis, which would include this area too.
Yeah. As a follow-up, may I suggest that we have at least some sort of recognition of the program plan for next year at the dinner this year, so that it will be brought forth at
The
least.
first anniversary of that event, we'll have another special event.
That's -1, right?
Yeah.
okay, is there anything we're missing here, Frank? Or so,
You just said that.
yes.
I move that we endorse the project using whatever resources we have amongst our allies and to build the broadest possible coalition toward May 1st next year.
And a friendly amendment to sponsor a town hall style event sometime
At
later.
least one.
At least
Oh,
one
yeah.
later this year in that regard. Okay? There's
Is
a
that a motion?
proposal. Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Frank.
No opposition.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Sure.
This is great. So,
You will
it'll be a good day in the annals of Detroit.
You'll be hearing from us.